Okay, so it is Sunday, September 21st. I'm gonna start editing these videos just because I'm getting kind of bored of just like talking to the camera, and I can definitely get some footage from my camera and splice it into these videos in an interesting way. There's no reason for me to just talk to a camera for 3 minutes and not have anything else, but I can do more, so I'm gonna start doing more. What I want to talk about is I want to talk about Napoleon, because his life story is just insane. If you don't know, obviously, not people in America, I feel like, don't really know a lot about Napoleon because he's not a part of our we don't learn about him in history class because the United States wasn't involved in the Napoleonic Wars. But he grew up on an island of Corsica, and if he would have been born 10 years earlier, he couldn't have even become a general, because at that time society was, people talk about how there's like a glass ceiling nowadays in terms of like success, and I don't know, maybe that's the case for some people, but there was definitely a glass ceiling like in the late 1700s. If you were not born to like a noble or aristocratic family, you couldn't be a general, you couldn't be like a certain level of politician. Like you had to be born into wealth in order to become a general. And his parents were poor. Like, they weren't poor for Corsica, they were actually like a pretty noble family on Corsica, but he got sent to France for military school when he was a kid, and he talked about how he just did not have any money to do anything, and his classmates would go out and they would, they'd be able to stroll through the town and they had nice clothes and everything, and he just didn't because his family didn't have any money to send him. And then when he was 16, his dad died, and basically his family was just in so much debt because of his father's like spending habits, that the only income his family was getting was his officer's salary. Like, he's one of the most inspiring human beings to ever walk the earth, in my opinion, because this is a guy that had no connections, had no advantages, and just worked his ass off and became the emperor of France, controlled one of the largest armies in Europe, maybe the largest army in Europe, and did it all really by himself. I mean, they've told stories about him where they've said like, oh, well, he didn't have any friends when he was at school and he was really socially awkward, and he would just read voraciously because he didn't have anything else to do. And he found out eventually that he couldn't become a general because like I said earlier, he wasn't from one of the noble families in France. He was a foreigner and his parents were poor, so he got very depressed for a while. But then the French Revolution happened when he was 20, and the French like killed off all of their officers, killed off all of the nobility in the French Revolution with the guillotine and just general fighting that was happening, or they just fled the country. And so the French needed generals, and they were willing to give him a shot because he was an artillery commander. He had distinguished himself. Well, actually, he hadn't really. He was kind of like a deserter in like 1792, 1793. It's just, and they just gave him a shot because it was like they just needed generals. They were getting invaded by every country in Europe, like Britain, Austria, Prussia. Every other country in Europe just invaded France because they were scared of the revolution and what it meant. And if you look at his tenure as emperor, they declared war on him far more than he declared war on anyone else. The only 2 times he declared war was the war in Spain and also his invasion of Russia, which were both disasters for him. But he got declared war on a lot more than he declared war on anybody else, which, in my opinion, I think the English have really kind of tarnished his reputation over the years. They compared him to Hitler and said that he was a tyrant and he was brutal, he was a despot and a warlord. This guy, like, he's basically the reason why feudalism, like, Europe got rid of feudalism because of him. He introduced so many law codes. He really tried to modernize Europe, and he spread the ideas of the French Revolution into all of these countries that he conquered. That was why they didn't like him. He was honestly kind of the good guy of the Napoleonic Wars. The more I look into it, I'm starting to think that the British were kind of the bad guys, in my opinion. But history is written by the victor. But it's fascinating reading about him, because he had such an interesting life and rose up from poverty, like no connections. His family was in debt, and got to the highest of highs you could ever get to. You know, it just shows that, you know, sometimes crazy stuff happens. All right, bye-bye.